This month, we are joined by former HCCO President Rita Hallaveld. Said that right? Rita is passionate about community building and organizing with an eye towards addressing the root causes of issues. With a background in social work, she previously worked as a mental health therapist for a decade and has served as a board member and event host for HCCO. A single parent of a preschooler, Rita currently dedicates her spare time to organizing with Columbus DSA's Childcare campaign and volunteers on the board of Camp Quest, Ohio. She's an outdoor enthusiast with hiking and rock climbing among her favorite activities. Rita will talk about Columbus DSA's campaign to bring high quality universal childcare to Central Ohio. Please welcome Rita.
Hello, thanks so much for having me today. It's good to see familiar faces. I'm excited to be part of this program. I joined the Columbus chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, because in 2020, when everything shut down for the pandemic, I was stuck at home with a 2-year-old and no support, no childcare since everyone had to close. I think it was about 10 weeks before I got any help. And of course, as all of us have experienced, there are a lot of different social traumas that happen and a lot of inequity that's been brought to light in different ways because of the pandemic. And that sort of prompted me to look for a way that I could get involved politically at a level that was more than just voting at the polls, because that only comes around usually once a year, right? Sometimes a little more than that. I try to be involved with local issues, but I felt like it was really important to put whatever energy I could into something that that could hopefully be more effective. I think when we band together, we see that there's a lot of change that can happen. And so that's my hope. That's sort of what kind of keeps me plugging along. So today I want to talk with you a little bit about an effort to bring universal childcare. Let's see if I can get there we go. Yeah, so our vision is that we believe that every worker deserves a living wage, every child deserves to be nurtured, and all families deserve to be supported and thrive. However, childcare across the US, including here in Franklin County, is unaffordable for thousands of families, and the average childcare worker makes poverty level wages. So that's why we're coming together to try to make childcare affordable for all who need it, not just those who qualify for public assistance, and pay childcare workers a living wage in Central Ohio. In order to do that, we need to build power and build a coalition to accomplish our goals. So that's why I'm here today. We ultimately plan to launch a ballot initiative to take concrete steps toward accomplishing these goals. The exact ballot measure and campaign language and timeline are going to be decided by the coalition. So we're still pretty early in that phase. And I'm hopeful that HCCO and others that you know might be interested in joining this coalition. We will strive to be representative of the population of Franklin County and all stakeholders, including communities of color, women, parents, childcare workers and providers, early childhood professionals, and labor unions that's who we want to include. So our broad objectives, which may be refined as we go, we're already looking at probably having to refine some of this depending on what turns out to be feasible, but our broad objectives are childcare and preschool for all kids ages 0 to 5. A program that values childcare workers. So currently childcare workers in early childhood are not paid a sustainable living wage. I'm going to get into some of the numbers in a little bit, but they're also not represented by unions, unlike school teachers. So that means that without the collective bargaining and without the political will to set their rates higher, they're also struggling. We hope to tax the rich, tax equitably, and then invest that money back into our community. There are there's a lot of legislation that's been passed by Ohio that prevents us from doing some really progressive things with taxes. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A if anyone has questions on that. But this is sort of where we're starting from, our dream. And something that's accountable, equity driven, and driven by community voice. So the background of this: high quality childcare and early education is an investment in our children and their future, not just because of academic foundations, but also because during the first 5 years of life, a child's brain is doing the most development. And that's actually really front loaded into like the first 3 years of life. So if we shift anything, it'll be towards those younger ages and providing care that's accessible for all of them. But during those years, a child's experiences and relationships, both positive and negative, build the foundations of brain architecture. And so then this development supports their ability to learn, their behavior, their overall health. Research shows that children who face a lot of stress and trauma in the early years of life are more at risk for experiencing the effects of toxic stress during childhood and even into adulthood. So the foundations of supportive care that tends to child development from infancy is really essential for setting us up later on in life to succeed. High quality early child care and preschool can prevent infants and toddlers from experiencing the prolonged stress that can disrupt healthy development. We've seen a lot of studies on like Head Start that has shown this to be true, and then other states and locales that have been passing measures for more accessible preschool and early childhood education are also showing a lot of benefits. Childcare also helps parents, particularly moms, go to work. And this is especially essential now that we've had the effects of the pandemic. I'll talk a little bit later about that. But recent data shows that women left the workforce at really alarming rates during February of 2020 and even through 2021. And many left because of the high cost of childcare. Women disproportionately work low-wage jobs with challenging hours and struggle to find childcare that fits their schedules. Research shows that policies reducing the cost of childcare and increasing access have positive effects on maternal workforce participation and work hours. There are even studies showing how much GDP increases when women are able to work. There are a lot of companies, including JP Morgan, that have calculated the percentage return they get back on providing childcare to their workforce, and it's over 100% return on investment. Local, state, and national leaders, however, haven't devoted the resources to ensure that all parents are able to access affordable childcare or properly compensate childcare workers. The reality right now in Central Ohio is that a single mother of two making $15 an hour spends half of her income on childcare and makes too much to qualify for publicly funded childcare. She doesn't have enough left over to pay for food, rent, healthcare, other basic needs. And then in addition, the people who work in childcare, who are disproportionately Black women, make poverty level wages. I have listed here on the presentation the average cost of annual tuition for infants in Franklin County. And this is center-based care, so not family home-based care, but childcare centers of varying sizes, is $12,860. That's on par with in-state tuition for a public university. It's less for preschoolers, but this is the average in Franklin County. It's a little higher in Franklin County than it is across Ohio. Yeah, if you have a specific question about what we're on, I'm happy to answer it. Yes.
People who do childcare in their home, who are not regulated, take care of too many children. Have there been studies done on that? How much is that?
How much does that impact the price?
Negative, positive effects. Quality childcare. I'm thinking of my sister-in-law's sister, who got like 6 or 7 kids she's taking care of. I know by regulation it's like supposed to be a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio. Like
the ratios vary depending on the ages of the children, which is why the cost goes down for kids who are 3 and up, because they don't have to pay as many teachers. Yeah, so I will briefly answer the question, which is about in-home care at like providers who aren't necessarily regulated because they're not licensed. There is a license process in Ohio for providing home-based care, but of course we all know that not everyone does that. And there's a lot of like family and kinship care that happens, right? But how that impacts the quality of care. It can impact the quality of care significantly. I will briefly point you to a book I read that inspired me to get to pull people together to try to get this project going, which is called Crawling Behind. It's by Elliot Haspel, and he's got a lot of articles out as well. But he goes into great detail looking at the landscape of childcare in the United States and what research shows about all the different like types of care, the cost, how it impacts people, and then gives some really good policy recommendations. So that served as kind of an inspiration for me. But yes, unregulated care can definitely be a huge problem, but it's also a lot cheaper, right? So if we can change how expensive care is in the United States, we can help reduce the risk to kids when they're in situations where they're not being adequately supervised or not being provided with developmentally appropriate care, right? So yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that at the end, but I want to make sure that we're able to get through the bulk of this presentation, and I'm happy to answer more. Yes, Crawling Behind. And then the childcare system is built on a low-paid workforce. So all of these factors are interrelated. 95% of the childcare early childhood providers are women, and they are disproportionately Black. I do have access to some charts, but I didn't put them in this presentation. If anyone wants more information afterward, I'm happy to send it to you. The median wage of childcare workers in Ohio is $10.90 an hour. And in Columbus, it's up just a little bit at $12.47 an hour. So again, low enough that childcare providers qualify for various forms of public assistance pretty regularly, but they are still required to have some specific education in order to provide this care. So there's a pretty big gap there in terms of how we compensate those who are taking care of our kids, who are our future. And then the lack of high quality childcare and preschool is also an equity issue. I've mentioned a little bit about those who are parents, right? Mothers are disproportionately affected. Black women, other women of color are disproportionately impacted. And then the kids are disproportionately impacted. So this data is from Ohio. Only 26% of Black children and 41% of all children started kindergarten ready to learn during the 2018-2019 school year in Ohio. And those, they end up starting on average like 2 years behind. And that gap in learning continues throughout their educational career, which is another bit to point to how important it is that we impact the early childhood years. So we were inspired a lot by other cities. The one that's been the biggest inspiration, some of you may have heard of, was in Portland, Multnomah County, in November of 2020, passed a universal preschool ballot measure that taxes the top 8% of earners. It's an income tax. It's a very complicated schedule in terms of how they're taxed, but they focused on the top 8% of earners to fund it. And this fall, the first kids are enrolled under this universal preschool program. So over the course of about 5 years, they're staging up to provide free preschool for all 3 and 4-year-olds, I believe it is. It might be 4 and 5. I don't remember the ages, but free preschool throughout the county. And they're starting with neighborhoods that are the most disadvantaged. And that also coincides with the neighborhoods that are most impacted by climate change. They tend to be majority, minority, Black and people of color, other people of color. They have done an incredible job. We've been talking a lot with the people who worked on that campaign about how they did it. So we've been working on learning lessons from them in terms of how to get something on the ballot, how to make sure that it passes, all the kind of ins and outs of that. But that's been a really what's the word I'm looking for? Really inspiring campaign that happened in Portland. And there are some articles that you can find online about it. There's also more locally, Dayton and Cincinnati have a preschool promise program, which aims to provide free preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds. In 2016, Dayton passed an increase to their income tax. It was 0.25%, I believe. And a lot of that increase goes toward funding their preschool program in the county. So you've probably heard a bit about like Nan Whaley's campaign for governor and talking about supporting early childhood. And she was really instrumental as mayor of Dayton in helping to get this going. The Cincinnati public schools have also passed a levy several years ago, and part of that goes toward funding their preschool promise program. It's done kind of in conjunction with United Way in terms of administering that program, but it's through the public schools. And there have been some articles that have come out through, what is it? I think it's the Childcare for Every Family Network, or there's a funding group that they all have very similar names. So excuse me for not remembering exactly, but there was an article I read recently talking about lessons learned. And they talked about Dayton's program, Preschool Promise, and mentioned that it's just really clear that early childhood education begins at birth. Yes, question. This is for preschool, so 3 to 5. So kids start kindergarten at 5, but if they don't meet the like fall cutoff for their birthday, then they might be closer to 6 when they start. Kindergarten is compulsory. School is compulsory starting at age 6 in Ohio. Yeah. So this is for, I think they started in Dayton with all 4-year-olds, and then relatively recently, maybe 2019, expanded it to include 3-year-olds. There are other cities like New York City have passed some free preschool programs. And they've also talked about like not being afraid to make it happen quickly, right? The implementation and the importance of paying childcare workers a living wage. We believe that we can pass a ballot measure because the political climate over and over when surveys are done from different groups shows that the majority of voters believe it's extremely important for state and local governments to improve opportunities for children. And these feelings end up translating to really broad support for early childhood programs, maternal and infant health services, high quality infant and toddler childcare, high quality preschool programs. In Franklin County, a lot of, all across the nation, a lot of childcare providers closed due to COVID. Like we're never able to reopen because their margins are so slim. It's like a 1% profit margin at best. And it's really hard for them to break even. But even before COVID, a lot of centers couldn't stay open. Prior to the pandemic, in Franklin County, there were not enough slots for all the infants and toddlers at like centers or like licensed care providers. I think there were 2.1 infants and toddlers for every slot available. And this was data that I found from 2019. I can only imagine how much worse it is now. Yeah. The group Groundwork Ohio did a poll fairly recently, and their findings indicated that it is definitely an economic issue, as I touched on earlier, in terms of women and other parents. It's not always women, but it's disproportionately mothers affected, being unable to work or not being able to work enough or not being able to get a job that pays enough. Publicly funded childcare is tied to employment here in Franklin County. And so that makes it difficult. If you don't have childcare, how do you even go out and look for a job, right? Why bother working if your childcare is going to cost you upwards of $10 or $15 an hour and you're only going to make $15 an hour? Like, why go through the stress of that, right? So there are a lot of inequities and economic issues that happen. I just talked a little bit about the pandemic being a tipping point. They surveyed providers and parents. Early learning is a priority. So they found very similar results to the polling here from the Children's Funding Accelerator research. This was a national poll done in 2021. Groundwork Ohio this past year also found very similar numbers here. Majority of voters find this to be a top issue across the aisle. So it's not just on the left. It's not just for those who are moderate or independent, but even more conservative voters. So there's definitely an opportunity, I think, for us to find common ground, right? Even with those who are religious, because it is a family value. But we found that here the local political leaders just haven't done very much to make it affordable because of the funding, right? It's going to take increasing taxes, most likely, in order to pay for this. There is, however, a lot of American Rescue Plan money that has not yet been spent here in Columbus. And so that's sort of another angle that we've been looking at, seeing whether we can push for that to be allocated toward early childcare. It's hard, right? Like there's a lot of things we advocate for and it's hard to know. So I'll end here with a few ways to get involved, and then we can talk about any questions. I can take questions. I can provide additional information. There's various ways to get involved. You can join our email list. We send out a newsletter about monthly. Sometimes it's a little bit less because it's a small group of us so far working on this issue. You can join our coalition. So that's something that HCCO can decide, you know, as the membership and board decide if you want to say, hey, yes, we support these goals. We'll sign on and support, help promote it. But being part of the coalition can also mean being at the table in discussing how childcare affects you or people that you know, being part of the conversation and the work, whether it's research, whether it's planning out what needs to be included in the ballot language, or even down the road when we have ballot language that's been approved, helping to knock on doors and gathering signatures to get it on the ballot in front of voters. You can talk to your friends about it, anyone that you know who might be interested. It's really key that this be an effort by and for the people. That's the only way that we're going to make change that really helps us thrive as a community. And again, as childcare related issues come up on the ballot, you can vote for it, right? These are all different ways to get involved. I've included the QR code and the tiny URL if you want to get involved, get more information. You can also talk to me afterward, and I will make sure that any links that would be sent out, that you guys have those for the future, or in, it's not really show notes, right? Because it's not a podcast, but like whatever you, if you put this on YouTube. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the gist of what I have. I would love to take questions and just sort of discuss the issue a little bit further. Yeah, all right. This would be local. Franklin County, possibly only Columbus. So this is still something we're in the process of deciding. So right now, based on the research that we've been able to complete, we think that Columbus is going to be the most feasible for us right now, in part because of the different rules for getting an initiative on the ballot. So in the city of Columbus, there can be citizen-led initiatives, ballot initiatives put on, right? So you just have to collect a certain number of signatures. It's a percentage of voters who voted in the last mayoral election is how they calculate it. So the actual number of signatures required will change depending on when you put it on the ballot. So as we get closer, we'll determine like a timeline, right? And then we'll know how many signatures we need to collect. The Portland Universal Preschool Now campaign ended up having to collect their signatures during the height of COVID. So it was done pretty much virtually, and they managed to collect hundreds of, I don't know, hundreds, not hundreds, at least tens of thousands. I can't remember how many signatures they collected. So I think if there's a will, there's definitely a way to get it done. But there can be a citizen-led initiative put on the ballot for the city of Columbus. Ballot measures that are countywide have to be placed on the ballot by a county commissioner. So that would entail ensuring that we have someone willing to do that. Erica Crawley is the most likely person in Franklin County. She's talked a lot about like supporting early childhood, but that's sort of still to be determined. And then there are also rules about what taxes you can increase via like a county or a city ballot. So you can't do an income tax increase on a county ballot, but you can on a city ballot. You can do a sales tax at the county level, but when we've done some calculations of what could be earned, it looks like the biggest amount of revenue would come from a city of Columbus income tax, and that would cover the most people. So we're sort of still in the process of doing cost modeling and like making that as accurate as possible, because there are a lot of factors that go into it, right? How much you pay workers. We're looking at a wage floor that's livable would be about $17 an hour. The Portland campaign had written into their legislation in their ballot and like the legislation that passed, a wage floor that's related to a percentage of the minimum wage there. So as that changes, the wage floor for childcare workers will also go up and help cover changes in cost of living. We don't know yet if that's something that we can do here, but I think it's a really good lesson to keep in mind. Yeah.
Well, John Grove School probably.
Right. Yeah, that is.
They're always looking.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've been. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Inspection of the home that you can set up. Hey, I'm going to
Right.
childcare and there's no.
Right.
regulations.
Right. I believe that church daycares are also not regulated in the same way. There's a lot of things that churches are not regulated for, right? Which we all know that here. They don't pay taxes. They are not regulated in the same way, in terms of like mandated reporting, et cetera. But yeah, so we've also been following really closely all of the research information that the Crane Center for Early Childhood Policy puts out, and that's through OSU. They've got a symposium on early childhood care coming up in about a week, I believe. It's online. I've registered for it. But if anyone else is interested in that, I can pull up that information and send it along. So yeah, they do a lot of research too, and we've been kind of following that. Yeah.
Throw guns in there.
Yeah. Right. Well, like there's a lot of different ways to go about it, right? There is also, yeah, of course. Yeah. But like you're talking about something real, right? It's about finding issues that everyone can get behind and showing how it supports their broader goals, right? Even if some of their other goals might be different than ours, showing ways that this is actually useful no matter what side of the aisle you're on. And the way that we present that is going to be different to a Republican voter compared to a Democrat or independent or somebody who's very far left, right? Yeah.
Speak up a little bit. So. Whatever you guys thought.
I don't care.
I can repeat the specific question as well. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. Randall, you had a question.
Oh, no, I got like 20 more.
Question, discussion, it's all good.
My question is, I guess, on the mechanics of that is, are you thinking of, so if taxes are raised, so is that going to be used to fund like government childcare centers? Or will there be legislation, or will it be like, will people be able to get like money, like based on your income?
Right.
Will you get subsidy? Get subsidy from the government to be able to pay providers? What will the mechanism be?
Yeah, that's a great question. What is the mechanism going to be? Various places have used different mechanisms, and that's not something that's been decided yet. We strongly believe that it's important for stakeholders to help create that language, right? We do want to include in the ballot language some information on what the mechanism will be. The way that Portland did it was that or Multnomah County, I should say, the way that they set it up is that they included in the legislation that voters voted on, that what would happen is that there would be a separate group formed to help ensure that it was like accountable and equitable. And I think that it's administered in part through the county, but I don't recall, right? So that's one way to do it, right? To have it administered in part through the county and like existing public childcare stuff. There's also the idea of just providing money to families, right? Like if your kid is under 5, you get X number of dollars. So that's actually one of the policy recommendations that Elliot Haspel has in his book, is just give every family $15,000 for the first kid. It might be a little bit less like for additional children, but that basically is the subsidy that covers childcare. And then they have ultimate choice in terms of who provides that care, right? It could be a family member, but then they're not like stuck trying to scrap together childcare because the only job that they can get is in the service industry, which might mean that their hours are 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. and all the childcare centers that are high quality close at 6, right? So like that's one additional way to do it. I think that part of what will have to happen in terms of determining what that mechanism is, maybe do we try to have it administered through the public schools, right? Because there is some public City of Columbus pre-K. Those teachers are part of a union. They do get paid a whole lot more. Do we expand it that way, like Cincinnati did when they expanded their preschool program, right? But in terms of determining that, I think it's going to have to come down to, in part, what do other parents and childcare providers say is going to be most useful? And secondly, what are voters going to vote for, right? Like what's likely to pass? That's a big question. Like we will probably get a lot of pushback from establishment on just providing straight cash, right? Like they will spend money to fight citizen-led initiatives. They do all the time, right?
People like in the same situation my wife and I are. Never had kids, never dealt with this issue, not familiar with it. Well, we are, but
Right.
don't have kids now, retired, and they're gonna pull out the old, well, we're on a fixed income, which is BS, because if you're on Social Security, it's indexed for inflation. If you have a state pension, it's indexed for inflation. So don't give me that fixed income crap.
It goes up, yeah.
Fixed income probably got more, a lot of, but I'm just sitting here thinking, how do you convince me if I'm against it? I don't have kids. And it boils down to always vote for school levies because good schools are a sign of a healthy community. Plus my dad was a teacher.
Sure, you get a healthy community, you get people who are able to be in the workforce, and then you have a supply of workers, right? You have kids who grow up to be teenagers and adults who are not involved in a lot of criminal activity, right? They're like able to work. Like there's so many social benefits. And the United States is like the only like developed nation that doesn't provide any kind of a childcare, right? Yeah, so like how it's implemented will vary. One of the things we're looking at is figuring out how many kids are already covered by programs like Head Start, Early Start Columbus. That's a small one. That's preschool. It only covers 1,000 kids. But there's Head Start, Early Start, and then there's publicly funded childcare, which is based on earning a percentage of the federal poverty level. And then families pay a copay. There's a whole complicated chart in terms of how much they actually pay for childcare, and then it's subsidized by the county. But the other challenge with that is that centers that accept Title 20 funding, the publicly funded childcare, they get paid an abysmal rate, which is part of why they can't afford to pay their workers as much as McDonald's pays. And they get reimbursed based on the actual hours that children are there. So I pay for my daughter's childcare by the week, and it's a set amount per week, right? It's $230 a week. And it would be more if she were under the age of 3. But that's what I pay every week, regardless of whether she's there every day or if she's there for the full day. Oh, yep. See, here it goes. I'm gonna, okay, I'll leave that up for a minute or stop the share if we need to. There might
Is that for
be,
real?
yeah. Do I need to monitor that? Okay, cool. Yeah, shoot out if there's a question that I need to answer from the chat. Yeah.
Okay,
So, yeah, so just to finish up on that thread, they get paid a different amount depending on how many hours that child is there. So if that child is only there 2 days, 1 week, then they only get paid what the state says they get paid per diem, right, for those 2 days, which means that figuring out what your total costs and revenue are going to be is a game, right? Like it's a guess. It's a guessing game. How many hours are you going to get paid for? Like, what if a child is sick? You're not going to get paid if they're out sick. And then it relies also on parents doing a very specific like sign in and sign out when they drop their kid off and pick them up in order to get reimbursed. So it's like, it's a very complicated system, but there are a lot of children covered by publicly funded childcare. And it does not account for a living wage for childcare workers. Yeah, we hope to be able to cover both of those things, affordability and a living wage, but that will somewhat depend on whether we can write ballot language that the Secretary of State says fits the single subject restriction.
The other thing that keeps going through my mind as a professional tax preparer now is how all this is going to play into current tax law when it comes to credits for childcare. If I'm given $15,000, then I want to count that as money I'm paying for childcare, whereas the IRS may say, well, no, that is unearned income that you can't claim as credit, because I think that's childcare taxes refundable credit. What we know, that's what we've got that for sure. It's not high enough because I think tops out that at 44,000, you only can take 20% or something like that. Again, I have to look the numbers up for sure, but I see a lot of headaches there. Every time something like this is passed, there's always unintended consequences.
Right.
Wondering, are you looking at how this is all going to work into the federal tax law? And I don't know if Ohio gives, I think it does give credits for childcare, but I'm not sure because I don't think so. I've never seen that on any of my tax returns for my clients that have children. I see some of them, like I said, it's all over the board for what they pay. It's
Sure.
One's
Yeah.
paying, I don't know, she's in the Navy and she's got a little girl and she $16,000 a year for childcare. I think her daughter might be over 5 now, but and then another one will be just a few $100. How could
Yeah, there are huge disparities in what people pay, and there are a lot of different reasons for that, right? Age of the kid, where they're going, whether they're getting some kind of federal or state assistance. But the question for those on Zoom was about whether we're considering how anything that passes gets worked into the like how it fits in with federal tax law. So the example being, if what passes is, hey, we're just gonna give a credit, right? Give cash or something, right? This amount of money, and then you just pick where it goes, and then maybe somebody like there's a governmental way that like that voucher, it's like a voucher system, right? How that gets paid, like how that works into the tax law. Short answer, yes, we have to consult with attorneys to even write the ballot language, right?
attorneys don't know squat about taxes.
But depending, yeah, so like tax attorney, accountants, etc. Yeah, so short answer, yes, we'll have to figure out like what's going to work legally. But longer answer, like we're not even there yet, right? We've still got to get more input from people who are affected by this issue to figure out like what are the essential things and kind of do this as a group, right? Like, it's not by the people for the people if there's just a group of like 10 of us, right? Only, a couple of whom are parents of young kids. So yeah, like there's a lot that goes into it. And this is part of why we have these discussions, and why I'm excited to be here with you today, because not everyone's going to think of the same potential pitfalls, right? The same unintended consequences. And so that's part of the whole working it out. We also anticipate this is going to be a project that we're working on for a while. We don't have a timeline yet for when something would be put on the ballot. The Multnomah County campaign was over 3 years long, from inception to when they actually had something on the ballot that voters passed, and they passed it overwhelmingly. It was like 70% of voters in that election voted for the increased income tax to fund free preschool for every kid in the county of preschool age.
Hopefully we have got a backline, but I'm not.
Yeah, like it's gonna matter like who the mayor is, what city council says. So like there's a lot of work on kind of like getting to know various movers and shakers, right? Who's doing policy research, who's already in local government. But in the end, if it's something that gets on the ballot, what will really matter is the people voting and what the people are willing to support, right? And we are all in this together. And if we can help everyone to see that, then I think it makes a big difference. So yeah, do we have any questions from the chat, Carl, or how are we on time?
No.
Okay.
To follow up afterwards.
All right.
So far, nothing from people at home.
Excellent. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen, unless I've already done that. No, I have not. How do I stop sharing? Is it in the other? Where's the A icon at the bottom?
I have a question.
I don't
guess
see it.
I was gonna ask.
Yes.
So you mentioned in Portland, this initiative, and also in Cincinnati and Dayton. I'm wondering, like Canada, for example, how do you know how Canada does this? But Canada's had like some sort of universal funding. I mean, I'm just kind of wondering what other.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, like other nations have, like, it's just funded through their taxes, right? And like how that's administered, like, I think some nations do have like every child care center is like a government run center, right?
Right. Which is pretty extreme.
Right. And that would include so many other like regulations and structures, right? A setup to do that, and then to make sure that it's accountable and that's actually quality. The difficulty of getting onto something like publicly funded childcare already makes me really skeptical that that would be a good way to work it. We do have public schools, right? But then there's still like vouchers for educational choice. Some people do prefer, and it works better for their families, to have a family member caring for their children, right? But the benefit, potential benefit to just providing a subsidy for families is that they could choose, but then that subsidy could still be maybe tied to, okay, whoever's providing the care needs to come and get some basic classes done, right? Where they learn some basics about early childhood care, what's developmentally appropriate, right? How do you support a child emotionally and not traumatize them? And that can also raise the bar in a really big way. The book that I mentioned earlier, Crawling Behind, does talk about some examples of that and how that can be done. Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. It is amazing. Yeah.
So people that regulated childcare providers they're vetted and they have to do background checks and all that kind of stuff before they can be hired, right?
To be a childcare provider. Yeah. So like if you're going to be working in a licensed childcare center, or even have like a home care center that's licensed. So every state is different.
And worried because.
Like some states do not regulate the way others do. There's some horrific examples of like a woman who just kind of like traveled from city to city in like Mississippi or something. And like there was a lot of abuse and just like start up a new place, whatever, right? But yes, in Ohio, you do have to get a certain number of hours of child development education. You do have to have background checks that get passed, et cetera, in order to be hired to work with children.
It's I take lots of classes on child
Yeah.
sexual. Those people gravitate to where kids are. That's why I asked that
Mhm.
question.
Right.
We all know that.
Yeah, so some amount of regulation is definitely necessary. Carl, you had a question or comment?
Always says nice presentation, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Catherine actually asked, talk to Brad.
Yeah, so we have tried to get in touch with someone from Bread and have been unsuccessful so far in actually being able to like sit down and have a conversation on whether this is something that they would like to be involved in. So that's a continuing effort. Yeah. Bread is the Building Responsibility, Equality and Dignity, and it is a coalition of mostly churches involved in this, and they pick like 2 social justice issues a year to work on here in Columbus. And I do remember some years back, HCCO was able to be part of the Unitarian Universalist. I got that backwards. Yeah, the UU Church. They're kind of contingent in that coalition, and they'll do a big action where it's like a big rally, and they invite like the mayor or other city officials to come and publicly say whether they support some particular thing, and they like support different legislation, and they've gotten some really good things done. Yes, so we are hopeful that we can get connected with Bread, other social justice organizations, and then just various parents. Yeah, parents and providers. Yeah.
Catherine followed up. Right, John Sterling.
That would be excellent. Yeah, that'd be excellent. Thank you. Yeah, Randall.
I was thinking that if subsidies are given to people, would that create the possibility that, let's say, the parent could use that subsidy just not to work and then to stay at home with their child?
Yeah, that could absolutely create the possibility that a parent could use that subsidy to be able to stay home with their child, rather than working a different job outside of the home. And some people will not agree with that, right? And others will say, yes, this is great. I want to have that choice, right? Or I want my my child's grandparent to be able to care for the kids, right? Or like it might provide the opportunity to have just make it possible to access different types of care that fit better with different schedules, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, working hours that are outside of what childcare centers provide means that there are already a lot of families who are relying on family and friends to provide care, because maybe they have a night shift somewhere, right? There are very few centers that are like 24/7, right? That provide overnight care. And those that are there, like under the state's like star rating system, the ones that I've seen tend to be like a pretty low star rating. And I don't know about anyone else. I know there are like some parents in this room and probably on Zoom. I'm extremely picky about who is going to be around my child when they are asleep, right? Because we know the statistics on sexual abuse. And I want to make sure that my child is actually in a safe environment. And it's just like a lot harder for children to like go to bed in the environment that's not their home, right? Or what happens if you get off at midnight and then you pick up your child and you're disrupting their sleep, right? And then that affects their brain development. It affects how we function as adults when we're not getting enough sleep or our sleep is interrupted, right? So, yeah. Randall, another question. Yeah.
Do we know what percentage of childcare right now, whether in Ohio or Franklin County or however you write this,
Mhm.
is provided through religiously based centers?
That is a good question. I don't know offhand. I might have seen that information in some of my research. I would imagine it's significant. There's a website, I think it's Action for Children they're like a childcare resource and referral agency for Central Ohio. And they have an interactive map that will show you all of the, it'll show you all like the different childcare providers in the county. And I'm not sure if theirs separates out, like if you can put in the search function for faith-based care or not. But yeah, that is also a great question.
I don't know for sure how this plays out, like a faith-based provider of childcare service, people who work in those environments may feel more of a religious mission. Perhaps to be in that setting.
Yeah.
That may, for those people at least, compensate for the low wages.
You know, it's like Christian schools, our teachers there are much lower paid than public schools, but
Sure.
for that exact reason. Right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, like there are a lot of reasons that people volunteer, right? Like we volunteer for things because we are passionate about it, but that doesn't change the fact that if we are doing work, like the work that we do should pay us enough to live off of, right? And like not be suffering in terms of having to choose between food and electricity some month, right? Or being in debt or having a house with working plumbing or, you know, not infested with bugs or mice or whatever, like just to be able to take care of those things, to have the resources needed to thrive.
Get back to financial. So at this point, your research is looking at probably an income tax as the better way to go versus property tax or.
Yes, property tax has to be at the county level and a commissioner has to put that on. We looked at the mills that would be placed on like a property tax levy and how much we could realistically earn from that. Yeah, it's fairly low. So here's some of the challenge in terms of what we found so far with the research. Is that unlike Multnomah County, we cannot raise the income tax at a different rate for various earners, right? So we can't actually strictly tax the rich. Because it has to be at a flat like rate across the board, which is regressive, right? It is not a progressive way to tax. If we raise the income tax by some percentage, it has to be no matter how much you earn is by that percentage. Similarly with property tax, we can't do a mansion tax. We can't levy a tax only on properties over a certain value. So that does limit us in different ways than some other places like Multnomah County in Oregon, we're able to do. So yeah, we've looked at like different funding ideas. There's a wealth of information through different organizations that do research and funding information for childcare. And so like there's a whole chart on like different ideas for funding. And so we started with that and looked at what Ohio law says we can do for those various things. And we've got a spreadsheet that we're kind of working through, where we can kind of plug in different numbers based on how many kids are being served, based on how much teachers are being paid, et cetera. There's various formulas that we've been able to come up with from like US Census data and the Bureau of Labor Statistics on how those percentages break down for how much it costs. And like there's a forecasting tool that the county put out on like cost of childcare. There's a lot of information to wade through in terms of the research. So anyone who's, you know, interested in digging into that or double checking things, like we have a lot of different ways to get involved. Like I said, yeah.
So I've always felt, I know this is not like, I've always felt. If I get accused of being a socialist, there are certain things that should be not for profit, not necessarily non-profit. This is one thing that should be not for profit.
Right,
Healthcare should be not-for-profit. There are just certain things that are public goods or good for the public weal.
Yeah.
That fire departments, emergency medicine should be not for profit. But there's another, paramedics and EMTs are ridiculously underpaid in private services. But
Yeah.
I know that would never fly, but
Mm-hmm.
you shouldn't be making money off of taking care of kids. That's our future, and just frustrates the hell out of me. The people that, everyone saw a good cartoon about the people that are quote unquote pro-life until they're born.
Yeah.
It's like, yep, wash our hands of it.
But actually, that's my question, or you had mentioned this earlier, I think that, to what extent, I mean, if you think you know, like your opinion of this, is the pro-life movement now moving more into this direction? Because I've read things in the paper that now certain pro-life advocates are talking about this issue.
Yeah.
Hey, we need now to kind of put up, you know, and sort of see what we have to respond to this challenge. And I don't know how that's playing out in lots of different areas, but do you have any thoughts about that, how that dynamic might be developed?
How the dynamic is developing regarding the pro-life movement.
That's starting to move more into the direction of, hey, maybe we should be thinking about all kinds of things.
I personally, so I'm like not at this point speaking like as a representative of anyone, just myself, what I have seen leads me to think currently that there's still a lot of it's kind of like siloed, right? Like people will pick their issue and only think and talk about that issue without regard for how it's connected to other things, right? So like, what is the intersection of pro-life and say preventing abortions, if that's your thing, with providing affordable childcare, right? For some of those people, they're going to say, no, you should just stay home with your kids, right? Without regard to whether that's actually feasible. Because so many families, even if there are two parents in the home, have to be two earner households in order to make ends meet. And so if they're not aware of those connections, like that's just not going to happen. It may not be something they think about. But then I have seen things put out by religious people talking about exactly what you just said, Randall, that like we need to be supporting families in these different ways. We can't only look at making sure that every fetus is born, right? So there's some intersection. I think that the political and social climate is changing in a way that maybe we see a little bit more of that. But in terms of that far right, like evangelical, conservative, pro-life movement, I don't think that this has really entered into that conversation because it's so single issue, right? And there's so much black and white thinking that this is where I see a lot of intersection with like rationality, right? Being able to not think in a very black and white manner is essential to recognizing how these issues intersect with each other and how they're related. So like that's what I see personally. I think that there are, maybe different ways to go about changing the mind of someone who is very single issue. And I don't know, like there are a lot of politicians that like stay on the platform of not raising taxes, right? So regardless of what they think personally, they might not support this, which is another reason that I personally want to be involved in an effort that is going straight to the voters, right? The people who are actually affected the most. Yeah. So those are my thoughts.
I can see doing this.
Mhm, mhm.
As opposed to a county-wide level, because somewhere where I live, for example, I could perceive support perhaps not being as high
Sure.
as a large urban area, but
But then it could be because there are childcare deserts. It's not something that I mentioned earlier, but there are areas of the state and the country where access to childcare is just so abysmal because there are not providers, right? Or there aren't enough. And that can happen a lot in rural areas,
that's true.
right? It can and does happen a lot in rural areas. So yeah, there are a lot of different things. Something that's kind of exciting to me is that, like, if we're able to achieve this on a local level, right? Like maybe we only achieve it for ages 0 to 3, right? Or 0 to 2, which is still tremendous for brain development. Maybe we achieve it on a smaller scale. But if we're able to achieve any of these campaign goals here in Columbus, then as the program goes, we can see, like, other areas of Ohio will see what's happening and how it's helping the city, right? How does it help economic growth? How does it help educational readiness once they're school age? How does it help other social issues? And that's something that, like, we can already see happening in other locations like DC and New York, and then now Portland. Like, they're tracking all this information. There was a panel discussion yesterday that Portland State University hosted with various individuals, some of whom had been involved in the preschool, Universal Preschool Now campaign that passed. And they're talking about, toward a universal childcare, and talking about other things that are happening in the area and the state towards that, as it's sort of connected with this universal preschool measure that passed in Portland, and other things that could be coming down the pipeline, right? Like, how do we continue to expand this? Yeah, I believe the Crane Center early childhood thing that I mentioned earlier, they're going to have, one of their speakers is Elliot Haspel, who wrote Crawling Behind. I think he maybe is their keynote. So I'm very excited about that potentially being something that happens. Yeah. Actually gonna see Childcare Symposium on Children.
I'm kind of pondering this, sort of trying to think through, how this play out, So then if there were like a subsidy, I would assume that would be available for, even though it comes from tax dollars, it would be available for someone to send their child to, like, a faith-based childcare facility, just like, schools. I mean, we've had this issue working through the faith-based schools and
Right.
Vouchers, I guess.
Right. It could be a voucher system, right? And that might have the most political support from the electorate. I don't know. Like, it's yeah.
You're gonna hear the way, give money, no spend it on this, that, and the other thing, but it's gonna have to be, you're gonna have to show.
Right.
You do now. If
Sure,
you want to
yeah.
take the credit, your childcare, you have to put childcare provider, their EIN, their address, how much you spent.
Right. Yeah, there are ways to implement it so that it's not going straight to the family, right? It's just that it's earmarked for them, and then they provide the information, and then it goes straight to the provider. That is, again, a way to kind of tie increased quality to it, even if it's a family member, right? To say, okay, well, you have to take this 3-hour course before you can get your first payment, et cetera, whatever it might be, right? Like, maybe you have to go through a certification process. There are a lot of different options, which is like can be overwhelming, but it's also very exciting, I think, to know like we can tailor this to be something that works for our community. And what works here is potentially different, is likely different, right, than what's going to work in a rural area or another state.
I
Yeah.
can see another unintended consequence, just like in the schools. So you're doing development, you're gonna provide materials, books, videos, all that kind of stuff, and then then there being complaints about the content of this or that. Like my great niece, she loved watching a thing called Little Baby Bum. It's from England. Did your daughter ever watch that?
Not that one, no.
Great music, wonderful graphics, really just basic little stories I can't find until I start doing the wheels on the bus go, and you're like, shut up.
Oh,
Because there's an earworm for you.
yeah,
I can see,
yeah.
but that's probably something that's
Mhm.
someone's.
Right. I'm going to drop in the chat this link for the Crane Center, OSU's Crane Center Symposium on Children that's happening later in the month, since I've mentioned it a few times. And I don't know if it's too late to register for it. It is free. It's online. It's on a Friday afternoon. But I've dropped that in the chat for anyone who might be interested in more information. Yeah,
Oh,
no worries. I super appreciate, I super appreciate the discussion. I've really enjoyed being here and being able to talk about it. It's something I'm really passionate about. I could talk about for hours on end, and I've been really steeped in like a lot of the details as I've been looking over all the information I can find on the research to just kind of think about like how to approach the issue. But childcare was hard for me to find initially, and every time I've had to find new childcare, it's been difficult. And I know that's the case for a lot of families.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody online. Stop it here in a second and yeah, hopefully be up on YouTube and stuff.
Great.